Okay, so I think we're at 10 o'clock now, so we shall get underway. So first of all, I'd like to wish you all a very warm welcome and thank you for joining us. It's fantastic to have so many prestigious wealth management firms with us today. In today's masterclass, we will be looking at which wealth management firms perform best on Google. So next, I'd just like to introduce you to our speakers. So we'll be hearing from Dave Clough, who is our Head of Content Strategy. Dave has worked in a variety of businesses, which includes the finance sector for people like Barclays Corporate, and he's also worked on the Financial Service Forum website as well. We'll then be hearing from Justin Deville, who is the Managing Director at Receptional, and he has over 25 years of marketing experience working with a number of the UK's leading brands. Finally, my name is Simon Locklin, and I'm the Business Development Manager at Receptional and will be your glamorous host for today. So as we already know, each sector has its own challenges, especially within the finance sector. So when marketing within the wealth management space, we must overcome obstacles such as red tape, compliance, dry subject matters, and of course, ever-changing regulations. And this is before we've even begun to think about how to engage with the elusive target audience of high net worth consumers. However, despite the challenges, this also means that there is a wonderful opportunity available for anyone who is willing to take it. Where there are untapped opportunities, there will also be less competition. To demonstrate this opportunity, Receptional has conducted this search market landscape analysis. So this analysis has been produced in the form of an ebook, and our research indicates that there are almost endless variations of finance-related keywords. There are several thousand keywords in the wealth management space, the depth and variety of which is simply astonishing. Because of the ambiguous nature of many of the keywords, this means that there's a need to be highly targeted in your search campaigns to get in front of the right consumers. Receptional has undertaken extensive research and identified the key questions that a high net worth individual might ask when searching for expertise within this space. We have then analysed the biggest players in this market, see how they perform against the keywords and why, and then we have evaluated the performances of the 20 key players, and we will look at the biggest winners and losers in terms of driving traffic. We'll look at what the winners do well and how the poor performers can, of course, improve. So just before I hand you over to Dave, here is a run through of what we'll be covering over the course of this session. So first, we will look at what are the biggest areas of customer interest. We'll look at how do wealth management firms perform against our keywords. We'll look at the broader landscape and financial media and what we can learn and emulate. We'll have a look at real world case studies, and then finally we will be answering some of your questions at the end. So if you do have any questions throughout the course of this session, then use the panel on the right hand side of your screen, input your question, and then we'll cover it at the end. Of course, if we don't get time to cover all the questions, we will follow up with some direct responses afterwards. With that being said, I will now hand over to Dave to take you through his piece. Over to you, Dave.
Cool. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. In our first section, we're going to take a look at the key questions your potential customers ask search engines. So, through extensive research, we identified 4 core areas that potential customers are interested in. Those are wealth management services, ISAs, tax efficiency and inheritance tax, followed by retirement. We'll be taking a look at each of these core areas in more depth next. So we hypothesized a series of fundamental questions that potential customers are likely to ask wealth managers around these themes. We believe these questions matter. They demonstrate that the searcher has a strong intent to engage with the wealth management sector. Therefore, if you promote your brand to these searches effectively, you will win new business. Now, these fundamental questions were entered into Google Ads keyword discovery tool to retrieve the search data around these questions. This data was used to determine the relevance and importance of each of the questions. We then removed questions with 0 search volumes and with ambiguous intent. So this process left us with a portfolio of over 3,600 keywords relating to our core themes. These keywords represent just short of 343,000 searches a month. The keyword popularity, i.e. the total number of searches of these 4 categories, is shown on this slide. Most of the searches are based around the ISA keyword group. Even though other themes have fewer searches compared to ISAs, they're still important topics. They drive high quality, high value customers. After all, in this space, the quality of clients is often more important than the quantity. In the next few slides, we're going to take a look at each of the keyword pools that make up these 4 core themes. Starting with wealth and portfolio management services. This portfolio of keywords consists of the most fundamental terms that potential customers might search for to directly source a wealth manager. Both wealth management and portfolio management seemed equally important in terms of the number of searches. Now, in theory, wealth managers should own this space in the search results. They should be battling out for the top positions in Google. We'll be seeing later whether or not that is the reality. Next, we have ISAs. So general ISA related keywords account for as many as 2/3 of the wealth management search market. However, we felt that the customers searching for general ISA terms were unlikely to be the types of customers that wealth managers really want. So we removed those generic terms. Lifetime ISAs is a colossal niche with mixed customer types and intent. Despite this issue, we felt that its relevance to high net worth individuals in regards to their children was too important to ignore, so we kept them in. For that same reason, we also included junior ISAs. Searches around stocks and shares ISAs demonstrates a high level of financial awareness. In other words, it is likely that those searching for stocks and shares ISAs would be interested in wealth management services, making that a good niche for consideration. So, tax efficiency and IHT. There is great potential in the topics around inheritance tax. Anyone interested in these sorts of topics is likely to have significant funds and be in the market for professional services. Creating content about reducing inheritance tax is sure to gain interest with a valuable audience. So don't worry that the search volumes are slightly lower here. The relevance of these keywords makes this an important space and worth dominating. And finally, retirement. Now, there is a strong pool of keywords around retirement in terms of depth and variety. The interest around many of these topics is reasonably high, which is great. Some areas have slightly less interest, such as annuities and income drawdown. However, these topics that receive fewer searches often have a clearer user intent. In other words, the searchers are likely to be further down the marketing funnel and more likely to pick up the phone and become an actual customer. What's more, because these search terms are specific, it's quicker and easier to produce content that's likely to appear in Google and gain attention. So don't be put off by smaller segments. In fact, you can prioritize them in your content marketing strategies. So, in our next section, we wanted to know who's winning, which of the firms attract the most organic traffic, what do they do that others can learn from, and where are the opportunities in this space. So before we reveal the winners, I just wanted to talk you through how we produced the performance numbers in this report. So basically, we built a massive spreadsheet, and that's just a small sample of it. We collected Google ranking data for each of the keywords that we had shortlisted. These rankings enabled us to calculate the organic traffic that each of our wealth managers would likely receive. For instance, the keyword wealth management receives 6,600 searches on Google a month. Using industry click-through rate data, we estimate that whoever ranks position 1 is likely to receive a 20% share of those clicks, resulting in 1,320 visitors alone for that keyword. We ran that logic across all the keywords and all the websites we were looking at and all the ranks, and we tallied up the traffic numbers to build a league table. So with all that in mind, we're going to do a quick quiz. Who do you guys think ranks highest on Google when you search for the keyword wealth management? Is it Brewin, St. James's Place, Rathbones, Tilney, or Charles Stanley? Well, the answer is St. James's Place. They rank #1 for this keyword, which is a fantastic achievement for them. Then the next wealth manager to appear is Brewin Dolphin at the bottom of page 2. And there aren't many that appear beyond that. Now, that strikes me as being really odd. How can so few wealth managers even appear for their #1 service keyword? Now, if wealth managers don't appear for wealth management, do they even appear for any of our other keywords? Hold that thought for a minute. We're going to take you to our winners. Drum roll, please. So, the moment you're all been waiting for, who's at the top of our table? Which firm attracts the most traffic from our chosen portfolio of target keywords? Well, congratulations to Hargreaves Lansdown. Over the past year, Hargreaves Lansdown have received the most organic traffic, well ahead of their rivals. the firm has a reputation for strong outbound marketing, and judging by these results, it would seem to have a firm grasp on inbound marketing too. They have the broadest reach across the search results, appearing for 2,000 out of our 3,000 keywords that we looked at, and we calculate that their appearances generate over 7,500 website visitors each month, placing them at the top of our table. In fact, when we tally up the total traffic received by all of our wealth managers, it appears that Hargreaves Lansdown receives a 79% share of that traffic. So, where do our other wealth managers place on the table? Here's the top three. In number 2, St James's Place is appearing for just 147 of our keywords, but still earning 4-figure traffic. This result is almost entirely driven by them ranking so well for wealth management. And finally, Brewin Dolphin placed 3rd. But let's look at the whole league table. Now, I'll give you guys just a few seconds to look through this list. So, overall, we're really surprised by these results. The traffic numbers are actually quite unbelievably low. And we had to ask ourselves, can these numbers really be right? Can a brand as big as St James's Place really be ignoring content marketing and organic search? Well, we're going to look under the hood and see what's happening. On the face value, their SEO traffic is massive, receiving 135,000 visitors a month and rising. However, website traffic is made up of both brand and non-brand keywords. Brand keywords are typically existing customers, maybe just logging into their accounts, or they're at least brand aware. They've Googled your brand and they're looking for your website and are guaranteed to click on your listing. And your website will always rank number 1 for your brand. Therefore, there's no gains to be had there. There isn't much an SEO can do to improve your brand traffic. Non-brand keywords, however, are your potential customers. They're not searching for your brand in particular, they're actually brand agnostic. They might not even be aware of your brand, or any brand in fact. They might just be using Google to search for brand recommendations. After all, the public assumes that whoever appears at the top of search engines is the best. And finally, and most importantly, you're not guaranteed to rank number 1 for non-brand keywords. That's the competitive space. The job of SEO is to rank number 1 for non-brand keywords. Now, normally we would expect the non-brand brand ratio to be at least 50-50. More often than not, it's weighted in favor of non-brand, 60-40, even 70-30. So in the case of SJP, we find that approximately 96% of the traffic is branded. Now that's a huge amount, and well done to their brand team. That's a great result. But however, it means only 4% of their traffic is made up of non-brand keywords, i.e. new customers. That 4% is largely driven by the keyword wealth management, as mentioned earlier. A good keyword, but just one keyword. Therefore, yes, even though the numbers in this report have been generated via a select portfolio of keywords, they do seem to portray a fair summary of the non-brand landscape for wealth managers. In other words, it is reasonable to conclude that even the biggest wealth managers are not appearing for non-brand keywords in search engines, and that is a significant finding. So, I'm going to hand you over to Justin at this point, who's going to reveal to you who's really winning in this space.
Thank you, Dave. I think there's some really useful insights there. For my section, I want to focus upon what does that mean in practice. Because as you say, so far, we've only really looked at how wealth management firms perform for our target keywords. And yet there's a variety of websites that rank well on Google for our target keywords. So let's ask, which websites are the most successful in the wealth management space, and what can we learn from them? So the table that you can see now shows the sites that attract the most organic traffic for our portfolio of 3,500 wealth management keywords. And hopefully you can see that the top slots are taken by information sites and content aggregators. And the site that receives the largest share of traffic is moneysavingexpert.com. And in fact, MSE attracts 24% of all the searches in the wealth management space. That's 1/4 of the market gone. And this is a site that, remember, is designed to save consumers money. It's not really a wealth management site. That's not its target audience. Yet it is the biggest player in our market. You'll see too that the best placed wealth manager, Hargreaves Lansdown, ranks in 6th position overall. And on the rest of the slides, we've highlighted the remaining wealth managers in orange as separate to the publishers. And even if you can't see the individual brands, hopefully you'll get a sense of the distribution down the chart, and you can look through the detail on the table when we send out the written version of the report, which, as Simon said, will go out to everyone who's attending today. So there's lots of publishers in those top spots. And what does this tell us? Well, we know that there's a demand for good quality content. And yet, as Dave said, many wealth managers aren't leveraging their expertise. And so where they are publishing content, it's probably not being found. And wealth managers, in summary, are losing out to the mainstream financial media, even though they have better expertise. And so there's a question here, which is, why are we missing the mark? Why are wealth managers being outperformed in organic search? Well, let's look at the site that performs best, Money Saving Expert. So it's a site that I know a little, as will many of you, and therefore hopefully it's a good example that we can all refer to. It's worth remembering that MSE is not a direct competitor, but we can learn from its success. So the MSE website was launched in 2002, and this is what the site looked like at the time. We know that it was built for just £100, and you can tell. So who would have predicted that this scrappy looking website would transform the way that consumers research financial products and services? Well, I can state quite honestly that I did not see that coming, and I was asked at the time. You see, Martin Lewis, who set up that site, is a friend of mine. We were at university together. I was best man at his wedding. And shortly after he launched that site, he asked my opinion of it. He said he was thinking of investing his time in this new business, and what did I think he should do? Well, at the time, he'd just been made redundant from a very good job. He had a little freelance work that he was doing, but it was not enough to pay his bills. And so after looking over this dodgy looking new site, I kindly, with the best intentions, suggested to Martin that he might be better off looking for a proper job. And so 10 years later, Martin sold that business for just shy of £100 million. And in the meantime, he'd been awarded an MBE. And according to Google, he had become the most searched for man in the whole of the UK. So it was a pretty poor piece of advice overall. And I would love to say that Martin has been magnanimous and he's hardly ever mentioned that poor piece of advice that I gave him. I would love to be able to say that. But as you can imagine, it does occasionally come up in conversation. But joking aside, I think it's been a great pleasure seeing that site develop and become a hub of such fantastic advice and support for so many people. But it is worth asking, with the benefit of hindsight, why was I so wrong, and what is it that's made the MSE site so successful? Well, as you can see, there are three Martin takeaways. The first is that from the very start, that site was based upon publishing genuinely useful original content. The content is then well promoted, and as well as via Google, there are multiple channels involved. So social media, radio, TV, email, newspapers. And that's really when SEO works best, when it's part of an integrated campaign. The site itself has always focused on conversions, building the list, collecting those email addresses, building that audience and promoting the brand. And even by 2017, so 3 years ago now, some 13 million people had signed up to receive Martin's weekly email. So in short, Money Saving Expert has been successful because it has been a great example of effective content marketing. So let's move on, because clearly we're not competing with MSE, not directly. But it is worth asking, how can we improve? If we want to attract more traffic from Google, what should we be doing differently that can replicate MSE's success? So let's look at the three main areas of search engine optimization. So when deciding its ranking, Google considers three things. 1, your site's trust and authority. 2, the quality and quantity of your content. And 3, whether that content is optimized for Google. So let's look at each of those ranking factors in turn. Firstly, trust and authority. Some context. Google uses links to map out the internet. The search engine records which websites link to each other and how they do that. And these links are online relationships. Each link is interpreted by Google as a positive signal. It's a vote. This may not be the best day to be talking about voting, but it's a vote that says, these guys are okay, you can trust them, they have value. And then the quality and the quantity of your site's links determine how well it ranks on Google. So at Receptional, we use a measure, it's an industry metric called trust flow, which measures the quality and quantity, and you guessed it, the trust that Google has in your website. And trust flow works on a scale from 0 to 100. So Google has a score of 100, not many sites do. Wikipedia has a score of 100. The BBC, however, scores 95. And HSBC has a trust flow of 63. All of them still very authoritative, well-respected sites. And as you would guess, sites with a high trust flow have a better chance, all else being equal, of ranking well on Google. And so we have reviewed the trust flow of 20 wealth managers. And here are the sites with the highest trust flows. And as I say, what we expect is that high trust flow sites will attract the most traffic, which, as you can see, is the case with Hargreaves Lansdown. It has the highest trust flow and the highest traffic. That's what we would expect. But what this also tells us is that those sites that are highlighted in red aren't attracting that much traffic, even though they have good trust flows. If we compare that to St. James's Place at the bottom of the list, that site has a lower trust flow, but actually attracts more of the relevant keywords. And so what we conclude is that those sites that are highlighted in red either lack relevant content or aren't that well optimized. So let's look at each of those ranking factors. So which sites have the most content, or perhaps more importantly, which sites are lacking content? And we can measure content simply by counting the number of web pages that Google has indexed for each site. And once again, Hargreaves Lansdown is well placed. Google has indexed 87,000 pages of content on the Hargreaves Lansdown site. And this suggests that the site's success is driven by lots of content as well as its high trust flow. And yet, none of the sites on this list are what you would call small. Every single site here has thousands of published pages. For instance, let's take the site in second spot. Quilter Cheviot has 8,500 published pages according to Google. So why isn't all of that content attracting more traffic? Well, the chances are quite simply that that content isn't well optimized for Google, or the site has technical problems. So that brings us to our third question, which is which sites are well optimized and which aren't? Well, if we're talking about technical SEO, there's a whole range of issues that you might want to consider when optimizing your content for search engines. And you'll be pleased to hear that some of this stuff is fairly dense, and today we won't be talking about that technical detail. What we will look at, though, is one of the key basics in SEO, which is to include a relevant keyword in your page title. Generally, the home page is the most important page. So what we've looked at is which wealth managers are following that simple best practice of including relevant keywords on their home page. That's a fairly basic measure of whether there is intentional SEO happening on a website. And the fact is that we can see here that really we would say that only 3 wealth managers have well-optimized homepage titles out of our portfolio of about 20 sites. Lots of the sites lack relevant keywords on the homepage, and so our conclusion would be that they're not really getting the basics right. And in some cases, we're being quite strict, and there's an example here from Tilney. And I don't want to kind of pick out anyone or feel I'm picking on any individual brand. And in fact, what's happening here is that Tilney has a really nice page title, and it reads award-winning financial planning, wealth and investment services. So well written, a good explanation of what that website is all about. Unfortunately, though, there's a nuance that we're picking up on, which is the title doesn't include the brand name. And we know that Google loves brands. Google has spent years trying to get well-known brands to the top of its listings. And as you can see here, Google doesn't like the fact that there's no brand in the title. And so when you search Google for Tilney, all you get in the title is Tilney, which is a real shame because that sales message is lost. And as a result of that, visitors are less likely to click on the listing. However, an example of a site that follows good practice, Hargreaves Lansdowne, I promise I won't be mentioning that brand again for the rest of the webinar, does do a reasonably good job here with its page title. So some final thoughts. I think we need to think about priorities in SEO always, because in marketing generally, there's always 1,000 things that we'd really like to do to improve our performance. Generally, in any given month, there's about 100 things that we really, really need to do. But if we're realistic and if we're lucky with a fair wind, we may find that we get about 10 things done during the course of any given month. And so it's always a matter of prioritizing our work to make sure we get the most value from our efforts. And certainly in SEO, it's possible to waste a huge amount of time and effort and energy and not to make much progress. So the question is, how do we prioritize? Well, the strict answer is that it's going to be different for each of you and your particular websites. And if we were working with you as a client at Receptional, we'd come up with a specific plan so that we get the best return on investment from the time that we spend. Clearly, we can't do that here on the call today. So here's some pointers, some things to think about as you go back into your businesses today. So first of all, our keyword research has told us that there are thousands of relevant keywords that you could potentially be targeting. So as a starting point, it's worth making sure you've done that keyword research and you know what your potential customers are searching for. So that's the starting point. But actually, if we want to prioritize, what we need to do is to find out what you're already ranking for and build on that success. There's no point in SEO in starting with a clean sheet. You will already have some keywords where you're ranking well. The next thing to do is to understand the nuances of the way that people search, which means that you'll need to create a variety of different content. And you can see in the example here that Halifax has about 20 pages dedicated to different ISA products. And each page tackles a specific nuance or a different angle on the question, or maybe something around people's circumstances when they're searching. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should be copying this content, far from it. But what I am suggesting is that there are different nuances in the way people search, and Halifax has reacted to that. And you might want to do something similar depending upon the niche that you decide to target. And of course, we need to make sure that your content is optimized for Google, which means adding those keywords in the right way. There's an example here from Unbiased, which ranks in first position for the question, how to retire early. And as you can see, it's no coincidence that that exact phrase is found in the page title, it's found in the headlines, it's found in the content of that page. It's intentionally optimized to rank well on Google. And then finally, remember that Google uses links to decide which websites have the most authority. And the more authority your web page has, the more likely it is to appear at the top of the search engine. So make sure you're promoting your content. And in the case of SEO, that means actively building links in your niche from other authoritative websites. And I suspect that's something that lots of brands in this space are not doing, or at least not doing effectively. And that link building will be crucial to your success. So to finish off, good SEO is a combination of keyword strategy, content, and links. If you get all three right, you'll attract more traffic to your website. Those extra visitors will share your content to a broader audience. And if your content's helpful, they may even link to that content as well, which means you're building a flywheel. And the first turn of the flywheel is always the most difficult. So keep at it. You'll build momentum over time, you'll build success, and your investment in content will reap rewards. I know from experience of watching other websites in this space that is possible, and from the work that we would do with clients as well. So I hope some of that has been helpful. There's some information there that you can take back into your businesses and that will help you in your quest to become top of the search rankings. I will now pass back to Simon. Simon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Justin and Dave, for going through the details there. So I think just there's some key takeaways there, just to note. And of course, as Justin mentioned, we will be sending out a copy of the ebook that this session is centered around. I think we'd also love to hear your feedback as well. So I will try to give you a call within the next few days just to sort of hear your thoughts around today's session. Of course, if you don't want to hear from me, then please just drop me an email and let me know that you're too busy. I think as well, we've identified an opportunity within this sector. So if you do require any help with a content strategy, then we are here, of course, to support you. And I think with that being said, then we can now move on to some questions. So I think let's have a look. So I have a question here, probably best for Dave. If we were to start investing in non-brand terms, what do you think is achievable in a year?
Good question. I think that obviously it depends on the state of your website, where you're at the moment, and your budgets and those sorts of obvious things. But I think what that table showed that obviously Hargreaves London have the top spot by a country mile, but none of the wealth managers I looked at were performing particularly well. I'd like to believe that in a year I could probably get any of those websites to the second place of that list. And that's really, so I feel like I've looked at these keywords. These ones I think matter. Those are the keywords I'd probably, depending on the particular client, but would more or less want to go after and build content around those themes and actually see that person go up that chart that I've created. I don't see why that wouldn't be achievable to be number 2 in that in a year. I'd put my happy to say that actually. But what's specifically achievable, I don't know. We'd have to look at your strategy and budget.
Thank you very much, Dave.
It's going to depend, isn't it? It's going to depend, Dave, isn't it, really, upon kind of the specifics of the particular website and the niche that we then choose. And it always seems to me that you kind of need a long-term strategy of where you want to get to, and a short-term strategy of how you're going to make some money in the next few months, so that everyone within the business is happy.
Yeah, and that's getting that flywheel started isn't just about SEO and links. Actually, we do a range of things at Receptional, such as the paid social work as well. So it'd be how can we best what's the best return on investment we can get, and how quickly can we achieve that? Is always the question we ask ourselves when onboarding new clients. Is SEO the right thing to start with, or actually should we just do paid social? Is that the best way to get an ROI in the first 6 months? Was SEO gathers that flywheel momentum that Justin mentioned earlier?
Yeah,
brilliant.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. Another quick question here, which I can probably answer, is where can we see a full list or table of the companies mentioned within this research? Yeah, that will actually be in the ebook itself when we send that out afterwards. Appreciate that there's quite a lot of detail in some of these tables, so we do kind of have to show some snapshots rather than the whole table, but all the details are within the ebook that we will send out. I've got another question here. I attended one of your earlier webinars where the same homepage keyword issue was raised. This was for a big global asset manager. Is this space just poor at these SEO basics? And then an idea for some content on your part, getting the basics right. So I think probably maybe Dave would be best positioned to answer that.
Cool. I think I got asked a similar question at that webinar that seminar was mentioned. It's a great question. I don't think that any of these businesses are doing a poor job of SEO, not doing their websites. I don't think they're doing it at all. I don't think it's on their radars. So yeah, and the page title example is the best one to go to because it's a 2-minute job. I just send an email to whoever built your website and say, look, can you give us a decent page title? Put our brand and our key and our wealth management in it. Done. So if you haven't done that already, that's what you should be doing immediately after this webinar. What was the other part of that question?
Just bear with me a second, Dave. Sorry.
The question was, I think, about is the site poor at SEO basics, and I think you've answered that part, haven't you? And I would agree that sometimes I think there's cultural differences between the different sectors that we work in, And you know, in some sectors, SEO is just the way that the kind of marketing is done within those sectors, and so there's a much greater understanding and much more importance attached to it. I think wealth management has traditionally been an industry that's relied upon trust and word of mouth and networking, and it'll be in inverted commas old-fashioned in that way, and so therefore SEO has had less importance. There's perceived issues around compliance and what advice you can give, and I think all those things that you perhaps touched upon at the beginning, Dave, are reasons why in this space SEO is deemed less important or given less prominence. And then if you know, benchmarking, you look at your competitors, everyone is fairly closely aligned. There's no one is, you know, there's not huge numbers of people kind of pulling ahead, and Hargreaves Lansdown may be considered an outlier compared to the other brands that we looked at. So I think, you know, there's lots of cultural reasons why SEO is not given that level of importance. And now, from starting where we are, it is more difficult than if we'd started the whole process 10 years ago. I think the second part of the question was then around content. So, you know, what ideas are there for content so that we can kind of start to get the basics right?
Well, you know, one of my favorite sources of insights for content is actually a client's own Search Console account. Often what we see is that clients do have content, but it's not being well optimized. There's enough link building equity to those pages. But by looking at Search Console, we can find pages and keywords that have lots of what we call impressions, but no clicks. That is to say, that is the content that's so close to gaining traction, but just isn't. And that for me is the low-hanging fruit. So before we sort of build a new content strategy, actually let's figure out what you've got currently and how we can tweak it and optimize it so that performs better, so that what you've already invested in that content reaps the rewards. And then once you've got that foundation, I would perform like a content gap analysis, where I would look at your content compared to some of your rivals to figure out, well, what content have they got that you haven't got, that we can then reproduce and make it slightly better, and therefore rank above those guys. And then once you've filled the gaps, then we build a content strategy on top of that that's like, well, what's no one got? What's no one doing? There's new and original. And so there's kind of 3 stages to that. So the first thing, fix what you've got, fill the gaps, and then build a strategy on top. And that's a good foundation for content marketing.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, I think
more questions.
It's keyword. Oh, sorry, Sam.
Sorry, no, go on.
No, I was just going to back up what Dave was saying. You know, I remember when I started learning SEO, the SEO consultant I was working with at the time said, you know, keywords are content, and it took me ages to kind of get into my thick skull what he meant. You know, that's what keyword research is, though, isn't it? It's, you know, you look at what keywords people are searching for. That keyword is a piece of content, you know, that comes off that. If someone is searching for, you know, what is a lifetime ISA, you answer that question in your article and you optimize for that keyword. So all of your keyword research is potential content ideas.
It's your customers telling you what they want. So listen, listen to what they're telling you. And it's really available on Google Ads. It's really easy data.
Yeah,
cool.
So hopefully that's helpful.
So the next question I have is, link building seems to be a big challenge. With a PR firm already engaged, it's hard to give authority to another agency to represent our brand. How do you make this work?
Cool.
Who would like to pick that one up?
It's a good question.
It's a very good question. Right. It's we run a series of what we call technical link building strategies at Receptional that are particularly useful in times like this, because it's quite difficult to build links in the finance space, because, you know, content has to go through various stages of sign off, etc. And we want to get the ball rolling for our clients as soon as possible. So what technical link building does is it looks at kind of technical opportunities to build links without having to engage content, without having to get compliance involved. One of the things is, like, your website might have hundreds of links pointing to it that have been built up over the course of time. And as you've evolved your site, you've added pages and removed pages and changed pages, and you've got basically links pointing to pages that don't exist anymore, that have been deleted. And that's a lot of lost equity. So what we can do is we can find those broken links, those broken pages, redirect them to the correct pages, and then therefore we can build 100 links just by uploading a redirect file. I don't mean to get all technical on you, but it's a technical fix to actually build 100 links for free. And so another thing is your brand. If you're doing PR particularly, your brand might be getting mentioned quite a lot, but if your PR agency aren't particularly savvy with link building, they might not be turning those brand mentions into links to your homepage. So we can find all your brand mentions across the internet and then start to get in touch with those webmasters to say, look, you've mentioned our brand. Can you just link to our homepage? Because that's, you know, the courteous thing to do. And we can actually, without building content, just leverage what you've already done. So there's actually a series of technical things that we can do to link build. in the interim, whilst we build a relationship with PRs and with your brand team to understand what we can and can't do in the content space. So yeah, there are things we can do.
I think to add in there, Oliver, I think there is a real challenge with the difference between PR and digital PR. And PR agencies, run fantastic campaigns often, but without reference to that need to build links. And I think it's a missed opportunity in the PR space, because those links have got incredible value, and often the PR agency doesn't understand that, because that's not really the background and the way that they've been educated to get coverage, and so some of that can come from the in-house team. So I mean, you could be saying to your PR agency, we're going to measure you both upon your coverage, column inches as it used to be, but also we want to measure the quality and quantity of the links that you generate. So there's a metric there to measure your PR company against, and then when contract renewal comes around, that will be one of the metrics that your success is measured against. So I think it comes from within the business, and also it is possible to work with both PR and digital PR, provided both agencies understand kind of what their remit is, and you don't want your digital PR agency kind of treading on the toes of your PR firm, and vice versa. But it's just having a clear remit. And I think SEO, as I said before, works well when it's an integrated part of your overall strategy. But there's no reason at all why you can't be building links by placing content, which is a very different strategy to building links from traditional PR. So I think the two things can work hand in hand, but you do need two agencies that kind of understand each other and able to work collectively. I think that's one of the most difficult things, is getting all of this stuff integrated together. But it's a good question.
Great, thanks, Justin. Another question is, can you regionalize the optimization of brand and websites?
Yeah. Regionalize as in like UK towns and yeah, we mentioned like page titles earlier. Wealth management in London, wealth management in Manchester, wealth management in Bristol. You can regionalize your optimization entirely. In fact, I recommend you do from an on-page point of view. There's also local SEO, where we build directories in your local area pointing to your website. We make sure your Google My Business profile is well optimized, etc. So there's a whole regional line of work that we can do.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. And I think we've got looks like the last question here. How do we get people to see investment in SEO as worth when our clients are high net worth and unhigh net worth?
Can you ask that question again?
Excellent question. Excellent question.
I'll
take. I think it was. How do you get people to? How do you get business sign off for investment in SEO when your target audience is not the general public? It's high net worth individuals.
Okay.
And I think we can answer that question in a couple of ways, Lucy. First of all is that we ran a survey earlier on in the year to high net worth individuals. So that's people who'd kind of got a million quid in the bank that they were able to invest, and we asked them how they research financial products and services online, and the fact is that 89% of them said they started with a search engine. So high net worth individuals actually use search engines probably more than the general public, and it's a marginal difference, but that's the start of their journey. So you can still be publishing content and getting it in front of those high net worth individuals. The fact that other people who are not your target audience will read it as well, so what? That's not a bad thing. And then what I would say is all of this content marketing is quite often top of the funnel. So, you're introducing people to your brand, you're educating them, you want to start building a relationship, which was the example we saw on Money Saving Experts. You arrive at the site, you sign up with your email address, and you stay in touch with that brand over the time. You don't necessarily make a purchasing decision or an investment decision on your first visit to the website. It's a long burn, so you need to introduce the brand. But then there's all sorts of fantastic marketing that we can do to those people once we know them, and we can target in our ad campaigns specifically high net worth individuals. And we've run other webinars about how you might do that and use the advertising targeting in Google and YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn to target those high net worth individuals. So really, again, SEO works well when it's part of an integrated approach, and so it does need to tie in with your advertising and and making sure that you're targeting those high net worths, as part of your advertising campaigns, and that your content that you follow up with is relevant to those individuals. So yes, SEO can help you, but it needs to time with the other areas of your marketing activity if it's to be as successful as possible. And I think that's not what we're looking at today. This the research that Dave has done, I think, is fantastic, but it's really only one angle on the whole marketing mix. Cool. Any more questions?
I think that covers all the questions, Justin. So I just take the opportunity to thank everybody again for attending today's session. I hope you all found it really useful. Like I mentioned, we'll be in touch. We'll send out the ebooks, and then of course, if you have any questions or anything you think of, then please do reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help you. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care.
Cheers. Have a good day, everyone.